justifiable pay rises. But he refused to condemn the particular pay increase for the Chief Executive of British Gas, Cedric Brown. The Labour leader, Tony Blair, described the award as grotesque. Mr. Brown will earn £475,000 next year. Today he said he understood the reaction to his salary increase. When asked whether he would give any of the money back, he said, "I am considering my options."
Mr. Major was again forced onto the defensive, while senior Tories complained in private about the heavy damage they were suffering over the gas executive's pay rise. Ministers are determined that the consumer protection body, the gas regulator Ofgas, and their Director General should not be allowed to veto such salary increases. And in the Commons, Mr. Major insisted that only shareholders should have that responsibility.
I do not agree with excessive and unjustifiable salary increases. I've made that perfectly clear. But for companies within the private sector, that must be a matter for their shareholders and not for the government.
Mr. Major stuck to the general point about pay increases. He was not specific. Mr. Blair called the 75% rise grotesque.
Why will he not the right to put a stop to this kind of abuse so that these privatised utilities that are monopoly services that the public has no choice but to use are run and managed as proper public services run in the public interest?
And Paddy Ashdown kept up the attack.
Is a weak whimper and nothing to do with me, Gov. The best he can do about it.
What I am saying is the right way to deal with this is for the shareholders who own the company to take the action they consider is right.
The Chief Executive of British Gas made clear tonight that he was ready to review his increase in pay, due to go up from more than £250,000 a year to nearly £500,000. The company has come under considerable pressure as a result of the row, and tonight Cedric Brown said, "I can understand the reaction. I will consider my options and discuss it with my colleagues and executive directors in the light of all that has been said." For the Tories, the enormous increases in pay for those running the newly privatised utilities has been a public relations disaster, and even some right-wing Tories who strongly favoured privatisation are convinced that action should have been taken to stop it happening. John Sargent, BBC News, Westminster.
Missiles were fired at 2 British warplanes enforcing the no-fly zone over Bosnia this morning. The Royal Navy Sea Harriers were not hit and continued their mission. The incident follows yesterday's big NATO airstrike on a Serb airfield. That raid followed Serb attacks on the UN safe haven of Bihać, where fighting continued today.
The Sea Harriers continued their patrols over Bosnia as normal today, well aware that the Serbs might retaliate for yesterday's airstrike. That indeed happened at 8:15 this morning, the Harriers detecting a lock-on by Serb radar, then the launch of 2 missiles which missed. The pilots returned unscathed.
They're obviously relieved that it passed off in this way, but if I tell you that they're able to carry on with the rest of their patrols as the professional pilots they are, and will be flying again in the normal way, I think you'll understand that it's the kind of incident they expect from time to time.
The American warplanes which had taken part in the bombing yesterday were putting on a show of strength this morning, even as the Harriers were under attack. The aim was to remind the Serbs in Croatia and Bosnia that further attacks were possible. To underline that, NATO released video footage shot by their bomber crews showing how laser-guided weapons pinpointed the runways of Udbina airfield and how they could have hit more sensitive targets.
While we were restrained in what we did, we clearly have the capability, should it be asked of us, to take this a step or two further.
One of the RAF's Jaguars, based in southern Italy, has already been decorated after the raid. But unlike in the last major air operation of this kind, the Gulf War, there's little sign of the aircrews boasting.
The raid was intended to be preventative for the future rather than punitive, and I think it was a measured response given the circumstances at the time.
Yet that isn't how it looks to the Serbs on the ground. The damage to their airfield has provoked an outraged reaction, not just from the Serbs in Croatia, but from Serb leaders in Belgrade as well. And, more significantly, the so-called safe area of Bihać remains as hazardous as ever. The fact that the Serbs have lost their air power has not stopped them from attacking with tanks and artillery again today, and there's no sign that NATO will act against that. David Schuckman, BBC News.
School exam results are continuing to improve according to the latest school performance tables. The figures for England and Wales, as well as those for Scotland published yesterday, show the number of pupils getting at least 5 good GCSE passes is up by more than 5%. Critics say the tables are crude and unfair, and the government says it will soon publish proposals for improving them.
And is that all you put on the graph? Did you put anything
The most
else?
improved school in the country, Star Valley Comprehensive, Warwickshire, recently reprieved from closure, its proportion of GCSE grades A to C has leapt from 11 to 38%. Parents like league tables, especially when their child's school does well.
Great, really great, yeah. My son's coming up to take his exams in a couple of years' time, and I've got a daughter here, so I know now that they're being taught the things, you know, to get through their exams.
Well, I look them up in the paper, and I think it's important to sort of keep an eye on what's going on around us.
The head's delighted, but doesn't attribute the improvement to league tables.
The league tables are very much an irrelevance to us. What we're about as a school is individual student performance, and what we've been endeavouring to do is to make sure that youngsters do the best they possibly can. A byproduct of that has been an overall improved exam performance for the school.
These boys are learning about ingredients. Exam results are largely determined by raw material, and schools in areas of social deprivation like East London can't compete with the private schools and suburban grammars that do so well. A third of 11-year-olds at Rokeby have a reading age of 7.
In any inner city school, on these league tables, we are always likely to be in the bottom half. Not at the bottom, I'm pleased to say, but we're going to be in the bottom half. If you are faced with that year after year after year, there is a danger that you'll become demoralised and stop trying.
Ministers are being pressed to take account of social factors like poverty in the tables. That's hard to quantify educationally. Another idea is to look at year-on-year changes. Over 5 years, Rokeby's exam results show 100% improvement. Labour now accepts league tables, but wants them to show if a school adds value to pupils.
Our tables would use the information that's available on the improvement that's been gained by schools and the attainment of individual pupils in what the jargon calls added value, what I would call the ability of a school to actually achieve for the future of pupils.
And the government's considering changes.
It depends very much what one means by value added. What I mean by value added is what a school can do for a child to improve his or her performance during the time that the child is at the school.
That would require follow-ups to tests at 11. The Prime Minister says league tables are a huge success. He's glad to see truancy highlighted again, with this Manchester school having the worst problem, but overall rates slightly down. But as with exam results, some query the value of the figures. With Labour's newfound support for them, league tables are clearly here to stay. But until they go beyond the raw data and recognise the huge differences between schools, they won't get the full support of the teaching profession. Wesley Kerr, BBC News, Rokeby School, East London.
As Bruce Grobbelaar prepares to defend himself before the FA against the charge of accepting money to fix matches, more has emerged about the man behind the charge. Chris Vincent ran a safari business in Zimbabwe in which Bruce Grobbelaar invested money. Months after it collapsed, the two men were videotaped allegedly discussing football bribes. George Eakin has been investigating.
Bruce Grobbelaar and Chris Vincent posed happily together on June the 1st this year, the best of friends. That day was a golf tournament at the lavish Elephant Hills Hotel in Victoria Falls. It was billed as in aid of 2 Zimbabwean charities, but so far neither has received a penny. The day, which ended with the pair singing a duet, was a flop, just like their Safari Lodge venture which collapsed. Chris Vincent spent many months raising the necessary investment. He wasn't noted for his business success in Africa or in Wales, but other investors still backed the project, and $45,000 was paid for the first 3 months' lease of Acacia Palm Lodge. Chris Vincent assured Neil Hewlett, its owner, that he'd secured £400,000 to back the project. So Mr. Hewlett was surprised when he said he couldn't afford to buy this safari vehicle outright, but would pay instalments instead. The flow of money to Chris Vincent was beginning to dry up. The BBC understands that Bruce Grobbelaar, having lost tens of thousands of pounds through Chris Vincent without receiving an explanation, decided he would pay no more. Another investor from Manchester we've spoken to had offered £50,000 for the project, but withdrew because of the complete absence of any accounts or supporting documents from Mr. Vincent. Mr. Hewlett told us he wasn't sure which company Chris Vincent was acting for. This letter signed by him mentions both Mondoro, which is English and will shortly cease to exist, and the Zimbabwean Beechwood Investments, which is in effect a ghost company. Despite legal requirements, its accounts are undeclared, its directors anonymous. Important details, given the size of investment Mr. Vincent was raising.
Absolutely critical. And the investors should have seen that this, in fact, or Chris complied with normal business practice of furnishing them with financial reports periodically.
So in your view, he fails on 2 counts of law and counts of commercial credibility?
Absolutely.
Chris Vincent has told the BBC he still has some of the financial records of Beechwood Investments. He also insists that all the money Bruce Grobbelaar and others invested through him was legitimately spent.
One thing that still puzzles those who know the details of the collapse of this venture between Bruce Grobbelaar and Chris Vincent, which left them bitter enemies, is how within a few weeks they were allegedly meeting to discuss confidential and intimate matters.
The BBC has also established that Chris Vincent owes £3,000 to a car hire firm in Zimbabwe for 2 cars he rented in July and August. He abandoned the last one at Harare Airport on the evening of August the 8th, the night he left Zimbabwe and caught the plane to London. George Eakin, BBC News.
And a short while ago, Mr. Vincent made a statement to the BBC. He denies owing money to Bruce Grobbelaar or any other investors in the failed safari business. And he claims another company was responsible for the golf tournament described in George Eakin's report. It didn't make any money, he says, because of massive overheads.
The Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has vowed to remain in office despite being formally warned that he's under investigation for alleged corruption. The billionaire was elected in March this year on a promise to clean up Italian politics, but it's claimed his business empire bribed tax inspectors.
The news that Prime Minister Berlusconi is under investigation for corruption couldn't have come at a worse time. This morning the tycoon was still hosting the UN conference on organised crime. This afternoon he was fending off demands for his resignation. It's a blistering irony for a man who was only yesterday bathing in the international limelight. While Mr. Berlusconi was greeting the UN Secretary General in Naples, magistrates in Milan were preparing the case against him. So far, there haven't been any charges. The investigators' trail started with Paolo Berlusconi, the Prime Minister's younger brother. He's already admitted to paying 2 bribes to Italy's financial police over tax irregularities. The magistrates have reason to believe that the Prime Minister, who was running the family business empire at the time, authorized the bribes.
Ho guidato per 4 anni il governo del paese.
It doesn't take a formal charge, let alone a trial, to topple an Italian politician. Bettino Craxi, the former Prime Minister, resigned here from the leadership of his party just because he was investigated. Today, the opposition already called on Mr. Berlusconi to step down.
I said that in his position, I would resign, just to defend myself better and more freely than having so big responsibility.
But Mr. Berlusconi has said that he's got a clear conscience and that he doesn't intend to leave office. The Prime Minister's office has said that Mr. Berlusconi will go to Milan to face the judges in 2 days. His political future depends on whether his coalition partners think that he's become too much of a political liability. But there are already signs that the knives are out for Silvio Berlusconi. Matt Fry, BBC News, Naples.
The time is just after 6:15, and still to come, competition for the cable companies. A rule change opens the way for BT to provide TV services to some homes.
Women and heart attacks. Research shows the chances are just as high as they are for men.
And sacked for wanting to marry for a 3rd time. The vicar whose bishop says he must go.
British British Telecom and Mercury are to be allowed to offer television programmes down their lines for the first time, but only on a local basis. This change to Department of Trade rules came as part of a policy statement from the government on how Britain's information superhighway should be built.
This is British Telecom's idea of what the so-called information superhighway is all about. New technologies delivered to the home down the same lines as the telephone. The issue, though, is who pays the estimated £15 billion needed to build a nationwide network. Today, the government confirmed its view that the market will provide.
It's the market which is delivering the effective competition. It's the market which has caused BT and others to reduce their telephone prices. And it's cheap communications which are the crucial factor in allowing the superhighways to develop.
There'll be no change to existing regulation, which effectively protects the cable operators. They're licensed to connect about 3/4 of British homes to their version of the superhighway, at a cost, the government says, of about £10 billion by the end of the decade. This policy was recently criticised by a Commons Select Committee, whose concerns were not allayed by today's statement.
We will not have our superhighway till well into the 21st century. There will be parts of England that do have that development, and I think we're going to develop a nation of information haves and information have-nots, and I don't believe that is in the best interest of UK Limited.
This is a taste of the kind of service British Telecom wants to offer. It says it has the technology to build a nationwide superhighway, but needs to offset the cost by broadcasting entertainment, which it's not allowed to do. However, the government said today BT could broadcast entertainment in regions where cable licenses have yet to be issued. BT says it won't help to build a national superhighway.
There's a need for a switched broadband network that goes all over the country. And any thought that local franchises built around cable TV companies are going to do this simply isn't correct.
While confirming its belief that a competitive market is still the best way to deliver new technology to customers, the government has nonetheless made what could turn out to be a significant concession today in relaxing the restrictions which apply to new cable franchises. Tessa Curtis, BBC News, the DTI.
Sir Marcus Fox is to be challenged for the chairmanship of the influential Conservative backbench 1922 committee. Critics of Sir Marcus say he's too close to the party leadership and accuse him of not sufficiently representing the interests of Tory backbenchers. The challenger is Sir Nicholas Bonsall, himself a senior party figure who's chairman of the Commons Defence Select Committee.
If Sir Marcus Fox was surprised by the challenge for his chairmanship of the committee known as the 22, he wasn't showing it. He took the news in his stride when reporters told him they'd heard Sir Nicholas Bonsall had thrown his hat into the ring.
Have you really? Well, I don't wish to say anything about this. I'm a great believer in the democratic process, and I've always felt that if anybody wants to oppose me, then they can certainly do so. And I look forward to it, and I stand on my record.
But then just a touch of campaigning.
I always fight fairly. I'm a Yorkshireman. I wouldn't know any other different way. And I'm not really saying anything because it'll all happen next Thursday, and, you know, I shall be around.
Tonight, Sir Nicholas Bonsall's campaign message was clear. He'd speak for backbenchers, not ministers, and no one could accuse him of talking too much to the media, not even about his prospects.
That's for my colleagues to decide. I think I've got a fair chance.
The party hierarchy know they have to keep out of what's supposed to be a backbench battle.
The 1922 committee is for the backbenchers of the House of Commons. It's not for government ministers to comment about it at all. Anyway, thank you.
But whatever ministers say, hardline Eurosceptics believe Sir Marcus is too close to the front bench. One called him a government lapdog for helping put down the Euro rebellion with talk of a general election. He summed up his feelings for the cameras.
I think there's some concern, dissatisfaction, perhaps even anger in some instances about the behaviour of the current chairman of the 1922 committee, who in my view has not been fulfilling his responsibility or his role as chairman.
In the lobbies, John Major's right-wing critics could also vote for a change. They'll be joined by some on the left who see Nicholas Bonsall as an independent knight of the Shires. Sir Nicholas Bonsall's promise to speak out discreetly but firmly for backbenchers seems to be playing well. He's endorsed the leaked Central Office memorandum that warns ministers they're losing traditional support. But so far, the betting is that Tory MPs may allow Sir Marcus Fox and the party hierarchy to escape with a shot across the bows. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Urgent action is needed to make women and doctors aware that heart disease is not just a serious problem for men. That's the main conclusion of new research conducted by the National Forum for Coronary Heart Disease Prevention. The report shows that heart disease is the single greatest cause of death among women in Britain and accounts for 1 death in 4.
Throughout Britain, hospital wards testify to the scale of heart disease among women. Asian women are especially susceptible, as are those from poorer backgrounds. Yet according to today's report, the patients themselves often don't realise the danger signs.
Yeah, nobody told me what the symptoms were. I always thought if you had a heart attack, as I said, I didn't know much about angina attack, a heart attack, I thought you had terrible pain where you couldn't move, and something happened to your right arm. And to me, that was a heart attack.
And specialists believe that too many of their fellow health professionals wrongly see heart disease as a male preserve. As a result, women are less likely to be referred for diagnostic tests and specialist treatment.
We'd like medical and nursing organisations to make sure that the medical and nursing profession know that heart disease kills women too, so that symptoms are picked up early, so that women recognise symptoms when they get them, and they're given appropriate advice and treatment.
Part of the problem is that little is known about the way heart disease affects women, as most research has been on men. The report wants to see more women screened for heart disease, but also calls for greater awareness among women themselves.
I used to exercise a lot, but I don't exercise that much anymore because I don't have time to do it. But it is something that I'm aware of, and I feel, guilty and want to make myself do it, but it's just a time factor.
The largest preventable cause of heart disease, though, is tobacco. With young girls now smoking more than boys, this looks like a problem that's here to stay. Neil Dixon, BBC News.
The Heritage Secretary Stephen Dorrell has revealed that more than £12.5 million was raised for good causes during the first week of the National Lottery. The final total was unveiled by Mr Dorrell in Trafalgar Square. 5 groups representing the arts, national heritage, charities,